All right, so here's our overview of energy metabolism. So the review of the metabolism chapter, basically. For review. Okay, so what is metabolism? So metabolism is something we have defined and talked about, last semester when we were doing chemistry and all of that. And we know, or should know, that metabolism is the sum total of all the chemical reactions that occur in the body. Body. Okay, so you should know or remember that metabolic reactions, there's two types, basically. There's types that break down things. So catabolic reactions, and they break down molecules into simpler ones. So that's catabolic reactions. So if they're ones that break down, then there are ones that build up. So the ones that build up are the anabolic reactions. And they build complex molecules from simpler ones. So the catabolic reactions break the molecules down into the smallest simple elements, and then anabolic reactions take those constituents and use them to build other molecules. Okay, so we just talked about the digestive system. And in the digestive system is where we break down the molecules that we eat, so proteins, and we break down those huge molecules into the smallest. So we can break them down to amino acids. And amino acids are used to build other proteins. Carbohydrates. We break down to basically glucose. But of course there's fructose and galactose, so the simple sugars. And then we have lipids, or fats. And those are broken down into monoglycerides and fatty acids. Okay, so what happens then? What is the fate of these different molecules that we eat? So fats, let's say fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. Okay, so we probably know a little more, the most about carbohydrates. The body wants to use carbohydrates, the glucose, because it's the easiest way to get energy from those molecules. So we know in carbohydrates, I'll use my other color here, we're talking about glucose. And glucose, when we need energy, that glucose is basically funneled into a system of steps to break the glucose down and release this energy as ATP. So that starts with something called glycolysis, the splitting of glucose. And in glycolysis, we're going to end up with something called pyruvate. And pyruvate can go into the mitochondria if there's oxygen and be processed to make a good amount of ATP. So it will be converted to a molecule called acetyl-CoA. And once it's acetyl-CoA, then it will enter the citric acid cycle. And from there, we can go into aerobic respiration. Okay, or that basically is the start of aerobic respiration. So, glucose is used to make energy pretty readily, pretty easily. Okay. Also, if there's too much, glucose in the body, or we don't need it as energy, it can be stored. So it can be stored as glycogen. Okay. Okay, yeah. So that's how we deal with carbohydrates as far as energy metabolism. Okay. So fats, look at fats. My color is fats. Okay. So fats, we mean triglycerides, just those, glycerol and 3 fatty acids. And when we break those down, they break into fatty acids and glycerol. So fatty acids, or fats, we know can be used to store, or used for energy, and it can also be used to store potential energy, right? So fatty acids themselves can actually go right into the mitochondria and be converted to acetyl-CoA. Once it's converted to acetyl-CoA, of course, those go into the citric acid cycle, and we go through aerobic respiration, make lots of ATP. Glycerol can be used to make energy because glycerol can actually enter glycolysis. Okay, so fats can make energy through its fatty acids to go into the citric acid cycle as acetyl-CoA, or glycerol can go into glycolysis and start the production of ATP. If don't need energy, then the fatty acids and the glycerol can be put back together as triglycerides and stored. Okay. Protein. So proteins are broken down basically to amino acids And they can be converted to pyruvate. They can be converted to acetyl-CoA. And they can actually, some of them can actually be funneled directly into the citric acid cycle. When we're talking about amino acids, keep in mind there are 20. It's not like there's one and it does all these things. There are 20 different ones, about 10 of which you get through your diet, and the other 10 are made by the body. And those different amino acids, some of them can do things that the others can't. So some can go in and become pyruvate, be converted to acetyl-CoA, some can go right into the citric acid cycle. And of course, they are used to make proteins. Okay, so going back to glucose, we've just talked about how glucose is used to make energy and to store energy. It can also be used or stored long term by being converted to a fat. So it can be converted to glycerol and then be used to create fats for storage. Glucose can also make amino acids. Okay, so one of the ways that we get those 10 amino acids that our body can make. Also from glycerol, in sort of the opposite of glycolysis, if we have glycerol and we don't need energy, it can actually then, not a good place to put this, but we can also use that glycerol for gluconeogenesis. Okay, so there's all kinds of stuff going on, and ultimately for making energy and making ATP, this is going to ultimately end up in aerobic respiration, which we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about each of these things, the carbohydrates mainly, how they are metabolized into energy, and then we'll talk some about the fats and how they do that, and then proteins.